Hello and welcome to Open Studio. My name is Darion and I will be hosting today's program. Today we will be discussing the importance and of how to make a first good impression, especially when looking for a job. And today I'm joined by owner of recruitment company Yazoo Recruitment, Karolyn Hawker. Karolyn has years of experience in the recruitment field, having worked with various top South African companies, and today she is here to share her knowledge with us. Karolyn, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Hi, Darion. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. I think from off the cuff, Karolyn, what I have found when I have been meeting with staff who have applied for roles is that they arrive for the job and they're not really sure of what it is that they've applied for. How important is it for people to read an advert?
Well, initially they need to understand exactly what they're able to qualify for when they read that advert. So they need to not only read what the advert is called, the title, they need to actually go through the minimum requirements as well as the skill set that they require. And a lot of them don't even start there. Okay,
that was going to bring me to my next question. What are the things that people do not realize recruitment agencies have to go through? So what are if there were 5 peeves that you didn't like, what would the things be in the recruitment space? What makes the recruitment role difficult?
Recruitment becomes challenging when we have a huge amount of CVs that come through our adverts. And if I'm honest, we get between 600 and 800 CVs a day to wade through. And the percentage of candidates that are applying for the correct vacancies is probably about 10%. So that is probably our hugest challenge. Often the job vacancies that we post have very specific minimum requirements. We will also note that some things are essential to have and some requirements are advantageous. It is important that those essential requirements are met.
Okay.
Spelling mistakes is a huge issue also. If you're sending out your CV should accurately represent who you are. If I receive a CV that is full of spelling mistakes, I'm assuming that that is how the person behaves in the job space. And I would probably not even continue reading the CV, but delete it.
That is so interesting. So from a recruitment side, the CV is the most essential thing. Do you feel that people really have a disconnect between the CV being a piece of paper that they hand in versus it actually being a template of who they are in the workspace?
Well, firstly, a lot of people don't think it's important to compile their own CVs. They get their wives or their girlfriends or their friends to compile a CV that sometimes doesn't even have accurate dates on it. That's also why the spelling mistakes could come in. It's just very poorly thought out. So, you know, if you're not going to take responsibility for that first step, then you actually are putting yourself at a huge disadvantage.
I see. And I think that's important for our viewers to actually realize. What I've always wanted to know, Karolyn, the importance of social media. When staff or prospective staff are applying for roles, do recruiters really look at social media behavior? Are you looking at my Facebook profile or my LinkedIn profile and Twitter to find out who I am when you're wanting to send me for a job?
Well, it would depend on the seniority of the position and also what you're applying for. If you're applying for a marketing role, obviously you would need to have a huge online presence because that's just what the age of today is all about.
Right.
But if you are applying for more junior positions, I mean, for instance, a PA, I wouldn't be worried about her LinkedIn profile. Although, with regards to LinkedIn, it's a very good space to accurately check up that that person has actually been in the different roles and has had the seniority of the roles that they're talking about.
That they say, that they mention in their CV.
Yeah.
Okay. When you've interacted with people that are coming in to meet you in your offices, what are the things that you'll be looking for when somebody walks into your doors? How do you know that this is someone that you really want to sell to an organization?
Well, I'd like to go back first to the telephonic interview that we do, or even if you take it a great step further back, is once you have sent your CV out or you've put your CV on job boards, every time you answer your phone after that, you need to be aware that it could be a recruiter that's actually calling you. So I often will phone somebody and they're like, yes. Well, I'm not going to go into exactly how they behave. But you need to be aware that that is your first impression. So if you fail that telephonic interview, if you can't answer the questions we're going to ask you, and they will be very basic questions,
Right.
and also the minimum requirement questions, then you're not going to be asked to come in for an interview.
Okay.
So that is very important. So that impression is huge. You need to speak clearly. If you aren't in an environment that you're able to hear what I'm saying,
Yes.
say, could I please call you back in a half an hour?
Sure.
If you don't have the airtime, say, could you please call me back in a half an hour? Unfortunately, this is my traveling arrangement and I can't hear you. So that is quite huge.
Okay.
Once you're invited in for an interview, I think the important part firstly is to mention that don't agree to an interview time if you aren't 100% sure that you can actually make it at that time. Somebody who keeps rescheduling, it just shows me that when I've booked an interview with my client, you actually are most likely not to arrive at your interview time. We had a situation like that in the last few days, and that puts you at a huge disadvantage. Once you are walking into the front door of Yazoo,
Yes.
the big thing to remember is that the receptionist or your behavior in reception is being watched and documented at all times.
From the onset.
From the second you walk in. So once you've decided what to wear for an interview, coming to an interview obviously in slops and board shorts and a t-shirt,
Just won't work.
and you may laugh at that. I have graduates that do that all the time
You can't be
because
serious.
they think they are entitled. So
Right.
you have to dress decently. I find in Cape Town people tend to dress down more often, which as long as they are smart casual, that's not a problem. In Johannesburg, most people dress up for interviews, as they do in Durban. So Cape Townians, we are far more relaxed.
We're the ones that are more relaxed.
Yeah. So when you start interacting with the receptionist or anybody who's giving you assessments to do,
That is where
it is important that when you're asked to fill in a form, you do that gladly. If you have an issue with it, and the way you interact with the receptionist is obviously going to be noticed and, like I say, documented. So that's the first step.
That is so interesting. And I've never really thought that from the moment you step in and talk to the receptionist, that's actually where that's where your points are being handed up.
Yeah.
So it's not really about talking to you at the actual interview phase. That whole entire process of walking in, filling out the application form is where you're being judged.
Yeah. You must remember, we are looking not only once you have the right skill set and you have the right qualifications, we are then assessing the personality type, because our clients are looking for us to find suitable applicants that suit their culture.
Of course.
They're also looking for a team member to join an existing team. And if you are not going to be part of a team, or if you show yourself to be uncooperative, who wants to work with someone like that?
And Karolyn, it's really about you're selling a candidate, which is selling your business. Is that not at the end of the day what recruitment is? You're putting someone.
I'm putting my name.
Yes, you're putting your name on somebody else.
Exactly.
So
it's huge.
Yeah. I think for people who are watching the show, they've gone through the spec, they've now read it, they meet the essential requirements, the advantageous areas they may or may not have, that is advantageous, and they're ready to sort of make the application. How long are you supposed to wait if you haven't heard anything back? Do you contact a recruitment company back after an application made, or do you sit by idly and wait for somebody to call you?
Well, I think because you've qualified your statement that they actually do meet the minimum requirements, we always, at Yazoo, we have a comment at the bottom of our adverts that if you haven't heard from us within 2 weeks' time, then you can deem your application as being unsuccessful. As I mentioned earlier, we get 600 to 800 emails per recruiter a day. So it's impossible to actually reply to every person and tell you why you aren't suitable. However, if you feel strongly that you do meet all the requirements, please note if it's an affirmative action position or an EE position, if you do not fall into that criteria, it is a huge criteria that you're not going to be contacted back.
Right.
So I would say if you're not contacted in a 2-week period, then the thing to do, and you're certain that you should have been contacted, pick the phone up and give us a call.
Okay, so you can actually work on the engaging, unless you realize after 2 weeks, if you've heard nothing back, don't try your luck somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing is some people may be overqualified for a role. So if I'm looking for a junior accountant, for instance, I am looking for somebody that has not got 20 years experience and is still in a junior role.
Right.
I'm looking for somebody who is an accountant that's just finished a degree, that has top marks in his or her transcripts. That's the accountant I'm looking for.
Okay. Quite specified in what it is that you're looking for.
Yes.
Tell me, just off the cuff, who do you prefer to interview, males or females? Is there a preference?
No.
You don't have one?
Not at all.
I
I like interviewing people that are excited about the role that they're applying for. They obviously wouldn't know which company they're going to, because that they will only find out when they sit down.
Okay.
And I love interviewing some people that are different. You know, you need to
Okay.
stand out.
Is that something important? Is it important that somebody comes to be interviewed and really pops? Is it important to be different when you're coming into the interview? I mean, you may like it, but is that common in the industry? Should you come to work?
I'll tell you, okay.
Yes.
If I interview 6 to 7 people a day, all right, which is a common day for us. So after you've interviewed 6 or 7 people, even in 1 week a day, and then you add that to a month, and if I've done this for 10, 15 years, I need people to be noticeable.
Okay.
For me to remember what you stood for, and remember my job is to sell you at the end of the day.
Makes sense.
If you don't stand out for me, I mean, what do I have to sell, you know?
Okay, of course, to the person that you're dealing with. And HR is the department that you will deal with mostly at the organization.
Most times,
Okay.
not always. Not always.
Okay.
Not always.
I think, Karolyn, from my side, we've pretty much touched on the different elements of the recruitment side. What do you think people should be focused on when they go to a company? Now they've gone through the entire process, they've met with you, you've taken through what the company spec may be. What should they be doing when they arrive at a company?
Well, on arrival, there's a lot that goes into everything before they actually arrive at that company.
Okay.
They need to do their homework thoroughly on the entire corporate or the entire medium, small company.
Sure.
And they need to know who they're going to be interviewed by. Luckily, we all have an online presence now, so that's where LinkedIn would come in.
Okay.
That's where Google would come in. If you know you're going to see X, Y, and Z,
Yes.
you go and Google that guy or girl, find out a little bit more about their character, so you're prepared for your interview. You also must understand why you want to work for that company. Whoever's interviewing you is, like I said earlier, they are looking for someone that's going to be an integral part of the team that they're applying to work in.
Of course.
And they must have a vested interest in wanting to work at that company.
That is such an interesting point, and I'm going to explore this a little bit further after our commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Thank you. That's good.
Stand by, we're going live.
Welcome back to Open Studio. We were discussing quite an interesting topic for our viewers at home. Essentially, what are the mistakes and the pitfalls that people fall into when needing to apply for a role, for a new job. So the topic we're discussing is how to make a good first impression. And I'm joined by Karolyn Hawker, owner of Yazoo Recruitment. Karolyn, before we went to break, we were discussing the importance of research when a candidate is looking to apply for a role. But I think let's take it back. When a candidate is coming to see you and they are getting ready to sort of go through an interview with you, what is important for them to be prepared for in terms of their skill set when meeting with you?
Okay. Basically, if you've put on your CV that that you work on Excel, that you know PowerPoint, etc., you need to be prepared to actually be to write a test based on your skills.
Oh goodness. Okay.
So don't be surprised if you've got you type 70 words a minute, or you have advanced Excel, if I go and check that, because I have to send those results through to my client.
Okay.
And we often have candidates that walk in and they put all the different skill sets on their CVs, and when they're asked to write a test, they say, oops, well, I haven't worked on that for like the last 5 years, so I can't really do a test. Please, can I come back at another time?
Goodness.
So,
and that actually happens.
Yeah, it's very important that you also allow the time when you're coming for an interview with a recruiter to be able to complete a couple of those assessments.
Sure. Okay. And what is, I've always wanted to know this question, a cover letter. Sometimes there are cover letters that are required accompanying the CV. What is a cover letter? What should it consist of? And how's the best way to write a cover letter?
Well, firstly, you know, it goes back to candidates blanketing. You know, they will find 10 different vacancies that have Karolyn Hawker after them. And what they will do is they will just keep sending their CVs for any vacancies. So I think I'm impressed when I receive a cover letter that actually says, Dear Karolyn, or Hi Karolyn, or whatever, Hey Karolyn. Then I know that candidate at least has seen my name. Okay. That doesn't mean he's read the advert.
Okay.
But anyway, for instance, if you have read the advert, the thing to do is to go through exactly what I've said the minimum requirements are actually, and to highlight in a brief point form exactly why you're applying for that specific role, and the highlights on your CV as to why you believe you are entitled or you would like to be invited for an interview. Okay, so your cover letter does need to be specific. It should not be a story about what a fast learner you are, and you know where you grew up, and what your wife does. That doesn't matter.
Right.
It has no relevance.
So no personal
to the basics. No.
Okay. Well, that's
and also candidates that say they're dynamic, they're beautiful, they whatever. I'm going to see that during my interview. I'm also going to get back to that when we do the references, because your referees are going to be called specifically to find out about whether you are as dynamic as you say you are.
What you say.
Sure.
That's an interesting lead on, because when it comes to references, there are many times that I know I've personally worked at companies and I may not have gotten along with my manager the best that I could have. How important are references in your world?
They are of extreme importance.
So does that add?
Yeah. So if I can give any advice on referees, is when you leave a company, even if it's a company that you've worked at 5 years ago, if you're going to put that reference onto your CV or allow me to call them, you need to have kept in contact with that person, not on a weekly basis, but on a yearly basis maybe, know what's happening in their lives, and especially before you walk into the interview with me or before I call them, the best thing to do is to call that referee up and remind them, hey, remember me, I worked for you 5 years ago. Have a brief chat with them. Could I ask, I'm in the job market again, could I ask Karolyn to give you a call? And then when we phone them, the referee's not caught off guard. Him or she is aware that they're going to be called for a reference. They've had time to think about how awesome you were at that position, and also how they've had time to think about where your challenges had been, and possibly they could have understood from your phone call where and what you've learnt since the time you've left there. So it's important actually to make that call. Now, the importance of references in our life, if you mentioned you maybe didn't get on with somebody a few years ago, and I need to call that company for a reference. If it's a mediocre or poor reference, I will always do another reference. So what I'm trying to say is the job or the profile we put together for our client would entail a CV, a profile that I've specifically written that's going to sell the candidate, and then also 2 references plus all their qualifications, clear RTC checks, clear criminal checks, and all their qualification checks.
An entire package.
So it's a whole process. So basically the references play a huge part, because that is the only time I can find out exactly how you have behaved in a certain role. And most people that walk in and sit in my office for an interview, they're on their best behavior. They want this job. They are just perfect. That's who they are.
And wonderful in any way.
So that is also why we need to make sure that the qualifications are real, that this person is efficient in the
Yes.
role that they
And
play.
what they're saying is
So,
true.
so although they could have passed an Excel test in our offices, one of the things we will ask, especially if they're required to have advanced Excel, is how did advanced Excel, what role did it play in their day-to-day lives, and how the accuracy level, etc. So yeah, references are hugely important.
Goodness.
What I mentioned about doing 3 references, we are required to send in 2.
Okay.
If I get a dud reference from somebody, I will
Yes.
then call the applicant and say, look, we need to do a second reference at that client, at that company you worked for, please can you give
Send
me
us
another.
okay.
Because people do have issues with people.
Yes.
We all rub each other up the wrong way every now and
Yes, of
again.
course.
We have friends and enemies in companies. Conflict is a huge
Yes.
situation in the work environment, so I will always do a third reference.
Okay. So
But then sorry, Darion,
No.
then you must know I'm going to present my client with all 3, not just with the 2
2.
good ones. Yeah.
So you're essentially saying there are 3 that I've done. One, would you actually say one has been a dud, and that's why I've got a third opinion?
Well, any of my clients know that if they're receiving 3 references,
Then
that one has been a challenging reference.
Okay.
And they will understand the reasons why that could have been a challenging reference, but they will definitely be privy to seeing that reference.
Interesting. Is somebody, when you're selling a candidate, based on their references or more on their skill set and your interaction with them? So if you're going to one of the top companies in South Africa that you work for, and you're selling me, for instance, as an example, if you've gotten back very mediocre but not terrible references, do you sell the references or more me based on what your experience has been in your interaction?
Firstly, if someone has mediocre references times 3, there's no ways I'm selling that person anyway.
Okay, so there's already one down.
Yes. But if they have a challenging reference and 2 good references, and they meet the skill requirement as well as the interview that they went through with me, the other thing is, another big thing we look at if a candidate has job hopped. So I would suggest that you need to stick to jobs for at least 2 years at a time, or have a really good reason why you've moved. Because somebody who has bits and pieces on a CV, I can't sell that to one of my clients, because they're not going to pay me to find them someone that's going to be moving on in the next 6 months.
Okay. So 2 years is a good benchmark for people to, as a minimum.
I would say around 2 years, unless there's a good reason why you are going to be moving on.
Okay.
And more money is not necessarily a good reason.
Yes.
Traveling is sometimes a good reason.
What are the things that people have said to you, just in general, over the past years that you've been doing recruitment? Why do people leave? Why do they generally leave their jobs to look for other jobs?
Well, often what they say to me is not what the
It's
reason
actually the
is. but boy, that's a huge question. I mean, a lot of people move for career advancement.
Okay.
So once they have completed, or they feel they have reached a certain level or a tier in their role, and they're not able to learn anything new. Also, if their job becomes very repetitive and they don't feel like they're challenged, they would move on. Those are good reasons to move on. Relocation is also a good reason to move on. Like, as I mentioned, transport, petrol costs are so high.
Sure.
If your company moves to a different location, or your lift club isn't working anymore, the best thing to do is to look for something closer to home, but then look for something closer to home.
Right. But in line
So,
again, as
so
you
it
said-
alleviates any warnings and disciplinaries because of late comings.
And again, speaking to what you've been saying, if you're going to be moving, just to sum up what you've been saying, make sure that there's the skill set that's appropriate for the role.
Yeah.
Make sure you're going through the advert
Yeah.
to make sure that the essentials are in fact there, so that nobody's wasting each other's time.
Sure.
Okay. I think for my side, what are the sites that people can be visiting if they are looking for applying for work? Which sites do you recommend people visit? I know one off the top of my head would be Facebook, but I'm not really sure if that's going to be appropriate for job searching. So where are the key sites that people should look out for work?
Well, with regards to Facebook, we have a Yazoo Recruitment group on Facebook. It's not a page, it's a group. So all of our adverts are stated, and we advertise on that site. But I don't think a lot of recruiters would use that forum. A good place to be looking, and it would depend obviously on the scale or
Type of job.
what type of job you're looking at. So LinkedIn is a space. I would suggest Careers 24, Career Junction, Best Jobs, Gumtree is not bad. And most recruitment agencies have their own websites. So that would either take you to a link, or they would advertise their jobs on that site,
Yes.
or it would take you to a link to one of the job boards.
Right.
What you also need to do is actually put your CV on those job boards. It's for free, and then you would have recruiters who are willing to do a search for specific essential minimum requirements, and your CV would pop up and you're more likely to get a call.
Okay.
However, on that note, I'd also like to say, once you are settled in a good job that you're happy in,
Yes.
the thing to do is to make a note on the job boards that you
Yes.
are no longer
In the job market.
in the job market. Yeah.
So it's important that if you're looking for work, maintain what you need to while you're applying for jobs.
Yeah.
But when you are actually in a job, you can go back and refresh that and say, I'm
Sure.
working.
Yeah.
All right, that's pretty interesting. Karolyn, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a
It has been an
pleasure.
absolute pleasure for you to join us. And I
Yeah,
really hope that
it's
our
been
viewers
fun.
out there have really taken some insight from Karolyn's experience in the recruitment field and helpful tips of what it is that you should do and shouldn't do. If you would like to get hold of us in Open Studio, you can contact us on www.capetowntv.org. Alternatively, you can call us on 021-448-0448. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.